As you probably know, in the death camps of the Nazis, there was not only a conveyor belt of death, but also a laboratory of monstrous medical experiments. Imagination instantly draws men who have done all this, but there were special camps for female prisoners, and Aryan ladies operated in these camps. So what were these female guards like? Many of them right during the trial, at the trial of fastest criminals, chuckled, looking at each other. You're watching X-War History, and now we'll tell you about female Nazis. Louise Dantz. Louise was born in the mountainous and forested expanses of Thuringia in 1917 on one of the farms of the municipality of Waldorf. That is, she was the most ordinary German girl. In her native district, Schmalkalden-Meiningen, she graduated from a public school and then moved a little further north to Brandenburg. Here, she got a job in a bakery. In 1940, she returned to her native district and became a postman. In 1943, recruiters were operating in every German state to recruit personnel to work in concentration camps. There were more of them than ever during the regime. The workload, starting in 1940, became colossal. The 26-year-old girl didn't think for long. In the same 1943, she took up her duties in Ravensbrück. For those who don't know, this is the largest, at first the only women's concentration camp in Europe. The camp situated in the same Brandenburg, where she had already been noted, 90 kilometers north of Berlin. After some time, she would be transferred to Majdanek, then to Auschwitz, and finally to Malchow. So she committed crimes on the outskirts of Lublin, in Upper Silesia and Mecklenburg. What kind of atrocities she committed? What kind of testimony did the surviving prisoners of those camps give? It turned out that she severely beat the imprisoned ladies who did not agree with the confiscation of the clothes given to them for the winter. Specifically in Malchow, where she happened to serve as a senior warden. She did not even give food to the prisoners of the camp there, often for about 2 days. Again, those who were dissatisfied on her order were harshly beaten on their sides, with fists or sticks. Finally, in April 1945, her sense of impunity reached its limit. She personally killed an underage girl. A historian studying this egregious case argues that Dantz was already accustomed to seeing the torment of the beaten or even tortured, but this time she also wanted to watch the death agony. From the very beginning, she did everything to make her victim die. In fact, it was a real execution based on her will. Why did the cynical commander of the guards choose a minor inhabitant of the barracks of the last specified camp? No one will know this, and no one will give precise answer. Like many of her colleagues, Dantz was frankly scary in appearance. All of them tried to humiliate, beat, send to experiments or personally kill young beautiful girls. Dantz was arrested on the very first day of June 1945 on the same German soil where her last place of work was located, in Mecklenburg. The war had been over for 3 weeks by then, and Louise was trying to blend in with the tiny crowd of civilians in the Lutzow community, 10 kilometers from Schwerin. But the community was way too small. Everyone here knew each other, and the strangers surfaced quickly. She was noticed by women who knew what she was doing in Malchow. The killer of the girl ended up in the dock of the Supreme National Tribunal held in Poland, the point of the largest number of concentration camps. It lasted almost a month. The sentence for the totality of criminal episodes is life imprisonment. Louise Dantz herself became a prisoner, at least until mid-1956. Further, the 39-year-old fanatic was released for health reasons, but her health was enough to survive until the year 2009. Hildegard Leckert. Hilde was born right in Berlin. It was in March 1920. After graduating from school, her homeland had already been turned into the Third Reich. When 18-year-old Hildegard was studying to be a dressmaker in her hometown, the Reich had already grown with Austria and Czech Sudetenland. By the way, the main character of this specific chapter did not finish these studies. Apparently, the money was needed very urgently. From the beginning of the Second World War, she went to work at a factory. However, there is something there too. It didn't work out. Yes, the girl had a painfully hot-tempered character, and she was still extremely picky. Such beasts were just waiting for service in the concentration camps for the so-called Untermensch that were opening in Germany and throughout Central Europe. From April 1942, the angry and picky 22-year-old German woman worked in Ravensbrück, and from October she worked hard in Majdanek. Then everything was standard. Auschwitz, She was registered here in April 1944. Hitler's cynical compatriot even managed to enjoy the Italian Alps. From January to April 1945, she committed atrocities already in the suburbs of Bolzano. It turns out that death factories managed to organize at one time even in France and Italy. In each of the disposal factories, those doomed to death remembered this creature well. It's difficult to call it a representative of the fair sex or to visualize anything feminine in her. After all, in Ravensbrück, Hildegard beat the prisoners with everything she could get her hands on. In Majdanek, she did the same. Plus, once she even set a dog on a pregnant resident of the barracks. Most of all, the beast loved to beat the young ladies with iron-bound shoes, brought new beauty to their faces. Like many other workers of the death factories, immediately after the executions, she could easily go to flirt with the male staff, and as a result, in 1943, even became pregnant. And in April 1944, as the viewer had already understood, she kicked the prisoners of Bolzano with her shackled boots, breathing in the healthy alpine air. According to the testimony of witnesses, the frenzied warden beat to death some pregnant prisoners, hounded some with dogs, also to death, and some drowned in the dirty cesspools of the camps. She was called the Beast, Fear of the Prisoners, and Bloody Brigid. Brigid or Bridget is the goddess of war among the ancient Celts. Lagarde was detained by detachment of one of the Allied armies only in 1946. That is, the bloody compatriot of Dillevange and others like him managed to hide from justice for some time. A year later, she was interned at the second session of the Supreme National Tribunal in Poland, where she was sentenced to life imprisonment. But 11 years later, she was amnestied. She worked as a brothel cleaner. After it turned out in 1975 that she was also a murderer, she went to trial again. She was held in custody for 6 years. So long was the charge formed in connection with the statements of those same witnesses. She was sentenced to just 12 years in prison, but those that she served in Poland from 1975 to 1981 were deducted from her. She lived freely another 14 years. Irene Haschke. This person comes from a family of Germans in Silesia, born in 1921 in Friedeberg in der Neumark. The one that today, belonging to Poland, is called Stelce Krajenski. She was brought up by poor parents. Immediately after school and a couple of years in a vocational school, she found herself at a textile factory in the town of Lubusz. The area is located to the north of her small homeland. In fact, already in Poland, which by that time was already part of the Third Reich. The empire of the National Socialists, led after the coup by Adolf Hitler, convinced many that urgent changes had to happen. Unlike the rest of the characters in this episode, she had no connections to the SS whatsoever, of which the camp guard structure was a part, working peacefully in the factory almost until the end of the war, that is, until August 1944. It was only that month that she decided to enlist in the staff of the Gross Rosen concentration camp, where she was trained to work in another institution of the disposal network, Bergen-Belsen in Saxony. Such a motive is not surprising. The salary was 105 Reichsmarks, an impressive amount for that time, free food and free housing, and even bonuses for overfulfillment of the plan. And to overfulfill it, another way of phrasing it, to bring people to the grave, is, as they say, not dusty kind of work. It was here that she committed all the abominable things that put her in the dock. But which ones? Haschke differed little from the accomplices that have already been described. Attracted by more favorable working conditions, after all this is no longer exhausting work on looms, federations and a larger salary, 23-year-old Irena trained in the bestial treatment of prisoners of the same sex, and then added something of her own. After a 3-week internship in the Sudetenland of the Hitler's Empire, she did terrible things in that very sad Bergen-Belsen from February 28th. According to eyewitnesses, this terrible warden controlled the distribution of food to prisoners. At the same time, anyone who was dissatisfied with the portion or just looked at it crookedly was beaten with a rubber tube worn on a stick. At the end of the day, she decided whom to give food and how much food, and whether to give it at all. Together with a group of colleagues from Bergen-Belsen, she was detained by one of the units of the Army of the United Kingdom in April 1945, having worked for only a month and a half. However, during this time, she managed to inflict so many injuries on the humiliated and insulted that she was sentenced to 10 years in prison. The trial took place in Lüneburg in November 1945. This is the place where she beat those whom she was supposed to feed, in Lower Saxony. She served only 6 years and then she was released, either for good behavior or as a result of an amnesty. Her further fate remains unknown to us. Anneliese Coleman. Anne came into this world in March 1921 in an unusual Hamburg family. It was a family of representatives of the German Lodge of Freemasons. Margaret and Georg Coleman brought up in their daughter an inner sense of superiority and exclusivity over most people. This was the groundwork thanks to which, after graduating from school, later the School of Tram Drivers, Fräulein Coleman received a party card of the NSDAP. The tram driver had found a start in the life of true Aryans and was looking forward to an invitation to a higher-paying job. And it wasn't long in coming, though only in November 1944. Anneliese became part of the so-called SS retinue. At first, these were personnel responsible for signals, secretaries, senior gardeners, and functionaries of other economic sectors of the death camp structure. However, if desired, any of them could be transferred to the warden. At the same time, she could be sent to any concentration camp of the system, regardless of which of them she wrote a statement to. Anneliese, for example, was sent to the Neuengamme branch. It's not far from her native Hamburg. A diligent member of the retinue worked here until March 1945, after which the authorities transferred her to Hamburg-Tiefstock. That is, she was registered in 2 departments of the largest Hamburg concentration camp at once. Later, she ended up in Bergen-Belsen camp. Many prisoners after they were freed recalled that Anneliese Coleman beat with any improvised means, with or without reason, and she beat people until she got tired herself. Anneliese Coleman did not have any special ways of treating prisoners, but she brought the already widespread methods of torture and humiliation to perfection. For any single offense, the prisoner was beaten until one began to choke on blood. There is a known case that one of the prisoners for a stolen piece of bread was beaten on the hands to such an extent that the hands became swollen, blackened, and simply stopped moving overall. Anneliese Coleman inexplicably hated elderly prisoners and pregnant women. We can't say that she did something specific to them, but was showing her hatred to the fullest extent. She always beat both of these vulnerable groups with special diligence, until the unfortunate victim practically stopped showing signs of life. The second type of torture that Anneliese Coleman inflicted on prisoners was direct harassment. It's difficult to draw conclusions about cause and effect, but perhaps it was thanks to this that the guard remained alive at all. Moreover, despite her cruelty, she sometimes slept in the barracks with the prisoners, without the slightest fear of revenge from their side. Obviously, this is also terrible torture, and what's even more terrible, its psychological impact all of this had on people. But the fact remains. Returning to Anneliese Coleman, for some reason she was interested in women of Jewish nationality in terms of love. Several, so to speak, romances with prisoners have been established. By the way, among the prisoners, Coleman was called exclusively in the masculine gender and no other than Booby. So after the war, a former prisoner from Czechoslovakia, Vera Fuchsova, said about Anneliese Coleman herself, "In Hamburg, we already had a woman who, in terms of attitude, was like an SS man, a guard in the camp. A young girl, we called her Booby, and she treated us sort of normally. A young, pretty girl, and she fell in love with one of our fellow prisoners. The guard had several such loves. One of the first was Lotte Winter, a Jewish woman from Bohemia. The second is a ballerina of Jewish nationality, Charlotte Rosner. And finally, many people recall a certain prisoner named Helena Sommer, for whom the guard had such strong feelings that she even planned to flee with her after her release to Prague. The same Fuchsova told about this at the trial. I don't really know how close the girl got to her, but her mother was by her side, and she would have done anything for her, and because of Booby, she was doing well." In any way, after the liberation of the camp, Coleman was put on trial. It was in November, in Lüneburg. She was sentenced to only 2 years in prison. She served her time in a prison in the German town of Celle. It turns out, it seems at first, that she was released in 1947. The habitual itching between her legs contributed to the fact that this woman also worked as a prostitute. After 18 years, she moved to West Berlin. In the end of the day, she did not succeed in anything in her life. She returned to Celle, getting a job as an ordinary cook at the hospital. Here she ended her days, dying rather early at the age of 56 years old. Johanna Baumann. This overseer was born in East Prussia in 1893. We are talking about the city of Birkenfeld, where her father had his own farming business. God did not reward the girl not only with beauty, but even with height. To say bluntly, she was almost a dwarf. Apparently, because of this, cruelty towards tall and beautiful ladies was cultivated in her in hard years. which was successfully implemented under the NSDAP. Local Germans who knew her claimed that, at least at the age of 20, she definitely did not have a fiancé yet. We know absolutely nothing else about this mouse, until the moment when she became friends with just boys from the Hitler Youth, whom she was ready to intimately serve in the hay for nothing. These were the kind of talks behind her back. They were the ones who told her the Aryan prime time is coming. Then again, a failure in biographical information. Finally, there is a reliable information that she got a job in her first concentration camp almost as soon as the first of them appeared in Europe. The fact is that even before the rise of the Nazis, Johanna was already secretly in love with her ideal man, Adolf Hitler, holding a photo of him under the mattress of her bed. She signed up to study in the main city of her small homeland, Königsberg. The geography of her crimes is the wildest of all on this list today. The 45-year-old Scarecrow managed to work for the glory of her beloved Führer in Lichtenberg, Ravensbrück, Auschwitz, the Hindenburg Auxiliary Camp, and finally, she even had her deeds recalled in Bergen-Belsen, transferred with a new promotion to a new camp, and therefore with an increase in salary which also consisted of bonuses. What was this bloody woman doing, who eventually rose to the rank of senior overseer mentor? Cruel 45-year-old mouse, after some courses and a short practice in Lichtenberg, in Ravensbrück beat with sticks all women who could not cope with a long walk close to each other. But it turned out that she, being a more convinced Nazi than many around her, did this back in Lichtenberg. And in the rest of the death factories, she used two midwives criminals to deprive of children pregnant women, originally being pregnant prior to arrival or even raped here by SS men from the fetus. This mouse also ordered something which is beyond understanding of even many criminals. Since both of her main wards had once served time for infant killing, drowning and strangling the most vulnerable with wire was a common thing for them. Bormann is the author of not only these commands, but also instructions not to hide killed infants, but to throw them afterwards for public observations by their mothers. But that's not all. The evil dwarf in Auschwitz fell under the command of the no less cruel Maria Mandel, who, having reached Auschwitz, was already an SS lieutenant colonel. Mandel knew how to break the jaws of prisoners with one blow. Bormann went through a good school of fanaticism thanks to her. By the way, almost 50-year-old assistant Mandel received the nickname Woman with Dogs from the prisoners, as she also liked to set dogs on prisoners. And apart from that, she personally sent to the gallows those captives whom she considered no longer good for anything. In total, thousands of prisoners died in the disposals. Bormann was captured by a British force in April 1945 during the liberation of the infamous Bergen-Belsen, which lacked enough men to bury 10,000 corpses. 60,000 surviving young ladies gave horrific testimony at the Belsen trial, where Bormann ended up in the company of Irma Grese and Elisabeth Wolkenrath. All of them were later hanged. Elisabeth Wolkenrath. She first appeared in the world in 1919 in Lower Silesian Schonau, in a simple family under the name of Müllern. Only two things are known from her pre-war biography. She became the wife of the SS man Wolkenrath and deeply hated the Poles, who were much more numerous in her native land than the Germans. And after the war, Schonau generally turned into the Polish city of Świeszczowa. In 1941, when the number of death camps doubled, she decided to get a job as a civilian laborer in one of them. But she has not yet had any position in mind, since she was not only not a member of the SS, but was not even a member of the NSDAP or Hitlerjugend. Back in her youth, on the first time, her tasks were household. She did only what she was good at, and she was a handy woman all her life. Though very soon a vacancy for a warden opened, and she submitted her candidacy. The authorities could not refuse a single true Aryan by origin who had already managed to work at least at any post in the camp. She was assigned to Ravensbrück, the largest separate concentration camp for women. What is she known for? Working as a warden here and at Auschwitz-Birkenau. Elisabeth, becoming the wife of the bloody Rattenführer Heinz Wolkenrath, quickly rushed up the career ladder. That is, since 1943, she felt herself the mistress of life and death, so much that she began to take a particularly active part in the selection of prisoners for the gas chambers, and those people for whom the workers were unprofitable had to be recycled in the first place. We are by now talking about feats inside Auschwitz-Birkenau. Here, in 1944, the former laborer became a senior warden. When the camp was closed, she was transferred to work in Bergen-Belsen. Here, as you know, people, without the slightest hesitation, were disposed of, until the moment the servicemen of one of the Allied armies appeared here. So many people were killed here that it was more appropriate to hold a trial right on the territory of the camp itself. Did you guess by now that Elizabeth was arrested here? There is plenty of evidence and witnesses victims and the numerous bodies of victims. The head warden was found guilty of sending several thousand women to the gas chambers. For some reason, she told the judge that she treated all of them well. Together with Irma Grese and the pitifully limping Johanne Bormann, she was hanged in the prison of the town of Hameln. A hanging conveyor from Albert Pierpoint was set up here, having a medical education that British men executed 608 people, and 300 of them direct war criminals of the Hitler regime. You might be wondering, what about her husband? Nothing is still known about her spouse. That was X-War History. Thank you for watching this episode. We hope you learned something new today. In case if you want to watch other episodes, click on the screen, subscribe and leave a like. And till next time.